Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who might be hearing this later on the Temple Beth Am podcast. I know some people are not here in person today because they're not feeling well. I know some people are not here in person because they live far away. I'm going to make another plea to the people who are generally healthy and are not COVID nervous about being here, but it's a question of convenience. I'm going to encourage as many people as possible to come in person. Again, your COVID risk level is entirely up to you. But in terms of making the decision mostly on comfort and convenience, it really makes a difference when most of the people who are here are in person. And then, of course, we're going to keep live streaming it, but it's just easier. So whoever's not feeling well, I hope you feel better soon. And we're going to jump into this. As I said last week, we're going to learn most or all, depending on how we go today, of one of the oddest Rashis that we're going to come across. If you've studied 10 Rashis, you'll know this Rashi is strange. But if you've studied 1,000 Rashi, like many of you have, you're really going to feel like you're in a different intellectual exercise. Rashi is essentially going to become a miniature page of Talmud in a way that he normally doesn't do. Normally, Rashi is extracting from Talmudic or Midrashic passages and turning it into a very compact, little terse explanation, but he usually doesn't show a dialogue. And I do not have a doctorate in Rashi, so I'm sure someone has written about this individual Rashi and why it's here, and we'll notice a couple of things that are odd about it. One is that he seems to be going backwards to review material that he feels like he hadn't satisfactorily resolved, and he's engaging us in a conversation that is just in category entirely different than we normally do. If you like Talmudic arguments, this will be satisfying. If your brain hurts when you're trying to hold on to the many different suppositions, and when the rabbis say, this is what you might have said, and the reason why what you might have said is not going to work because you might also have said this, if that begins to hurt your brain like it sometimes does even for me, then this Rashi will be challenging, and let's see how far we get into it. I actually think we have one small Rashi beforehand. We're on verse 9 of chapter 6. There are 3 Rashis on that verse. The first 2 have diburei hamatchil, have words that are directly related to the verse, and then after that we get into the odd Rashi. To remind us of the verse, chapter 6, verse 9, Vaydaber Moshe Kain. Moses said thusly, as God had instructed him, El Bnei Israel, to the children of Israel, V'lo shamu Moshe. We've done this already. They weren't able to hear, they weren't able to listen, they weren't paying attention, something to Moses. Me as something like as a result of kotzer ruach, literally shortness of spirit, or maybe even shortness of breath, ume avodah kasha, and from hard labor. We saw that in the syntax of that is definitely just an and, right? Since it's not in the front of a verb, we can't wonder, is it a vavai puch or vavai chibor? It just means and. We saw the translations last week that some of them were translating them as shortness of breath related to the hard work, right? As if the is not there. The way it's written is that these are 2 different things. Why didn't they pay heed to Moses? Because, number 1, shortness of breath, shortness of spirit, and because of hard labor, okay? We read the first Rashi on the Lo Shamu Moshe, where Rashi says that they weren't able to receive his tanchumim, his words of comfort that their situation will eventually get better. And now we're on the second Rashi, Mikotzer Ruach. Okay? Everyone kind of agree where we are? Marshall, you want to read the second Rashi on Kotzer Ruach? Hi, Sue. Boker Tov. And let's get Marshall a microphone.
So, Mikotzer Ruach.
Can you all hear Marshall?
Pardon?
Okay.
Got it. Okay. Mikotze ruach kol mi shehu meitzer rucho unshimato ktsara ve'eno yachol ha'arich bin shimato. So the translation which I have is, if one is in anguish, his breath comes in short gasps, and he cannot draw long breaths.
Right. That's a pretty darn good translation. I would say the second phrase a little bit differently, right? That if you are meitzer, if you have tsares, your ruach, literally the wind coming out of you, and your breath. I wonder what. Maybe the rucho here means his spirit is ksara. Everything is truncated. If you've ever experienced or been close to someone who's experienced anything like a depression, whether it's a profound clinical depression or more of like the blues, one of the things that we now know all the time, and it's part of the literature, is that what's happening up here impacts what's happening up coming out of your mouth physiologically, right? So the relationship between the emotions and the psychology and the physiology is very, very apparent, right? So if you ever experienced or know someone who's been depressed, sometimes one of the things that you experience them is that their affect is low, their sentences are short, they can't do what I'm doing now and really project, because it takes a certain amount of psychic vitality to project your voice and to say a long sentence, right? And people who are suffering, right? It's not that they are not necessarily thinking thoughts, but they can't actually produce the air. So this is 800, 900 years before Freud. Rashi is saying that what the Torah is saying is the reason why they were not able to respond to Moshe in the way that they normally would is they literally had kotze ruach, they had shortness of breath from their sufferings, which is what people experience even to this day. Marshall, and then Elon, and then I see Rick's hand. Oh, no, Elon.
Yeah, I want to go back to actually the word they use, which is stress. I had a heart attack 10 years ago, and the doctors at the time said to me, obviously you're overweight, obviously you eat like crap, but the single greatest contributor to your heart disease was stress, specifically stress, not depression, stress. And that unless I got rid of stress from my life, I was likely to continue to have problems. So I agree with you on the depression issue, but I also think that the Israelites were really stressed, and it takes a lot out of you. It just does.
Yeah. It's interesting. Thank you for that, Elon, and for sharing that. It's interesting that this comment of Rashi, which, and again, I find to be a millennium prescient, right? That the notion of depression and true what they used to call melancholia is a rather modern one, but it doesn't mean that humans didn't experience that before there was language to it. So human beings 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago experienced stress, experienced emotional dips, and their affect was probably not that dissimilar from what ours would be now, even if they didn't have the language to express it. And I'm fascinated that Rashi got that. And Rashi assumed that the Torah got that there's a direct relationship between your emotional present tense and what your body is able to produce. What I do find interesting is that this is a verse that is not explaining that the Israelites weren't able to respond, but they weren't able to shomeya, right? That they because their breath was so short, they couldn't even listen to long sentences, right? And again, if you ever experienced or been close to someone who's experienced depression, you know that's the case too. Someone who is going through that kind of a dip, if you have a really beautifully worded, 7-line paragraph that you're saying or reading to them on something that's significant, they're not listening after the fourth word because of their kotze ruach. They cannot process it. Rick, and then Diane Larry.
I was just going to kind of state the obvious. Rashi chooses Meitzar there, Shehu Meitzar.
Yeah, Meitzer. I think it's
Meitzer.
Meitzer. It's kind of like it's a.
Is it a Tzera? Because I can't see here.
Adjectival verb describing the status of being in tzara, in discomfort or distress.
Right, and he chooses that because of the word Mitzrayim and the narrowness there and the constriction and Gesher Tsar Ma'od and all that kind of thing. You have to. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Great. I totally read over that. I'm sure you're correct that Meitzer he wasn't just picking out from a list of synonyms of how he could have said this, but that is definitely evocative of Mitzrayim. Good pickup.
Thank you.
Diane, Larry?
So this is probably obvious to everybody, but it's not just feeling the blues or psychological depression, but there's a feedback loop between physical, how you feel physically, and then mentally. And I can in personal relate to the whole idea of Ketzer Ruach being an asthmatic and how that affects me and my ability to communicate. So I haven't read ahead. I am really hopeful that Rashi may have some suggestions for how to deal with this.
Prepare to be disappointed, and you're right, Larry, that it goes in both directions, right? That it's both the case that what we are experiencing psychically, emotionally, spiritually literally impacts our physical well-being of our heart and our ability to produce speech, and an inability to produce speech can put one in a sense of tsuris, absolutely.
And that feedback loop is something that I am not even close to an expert at knowing how to break. Yeah. I just know how difficult it is to break. And on those few occasions where I've been successful at doing so, it's been a conscious effort and a hard conscious effort at engaging in something like behavior modification. But I would think that you might have something to say in terms of meditation being a way of getting at this conundrum.
I'll linger there for a second, and then we'll go to Joanna's question. It's interesting you mentioned meditation. Tonight is the gathering at my home for people who are already signed up and are considering signing up for this meditation retreat that we're doing in Guatemala. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight and talk about throughout the retreat is the paradox that I talk about a lot when I lead meditations, which is that the more you expect a meditative experience to be specifically productive, the more you'll be disappointed by it, which is very similar to the prayer experience. If I want a lot out of this Amida right now, it's probably not going to produce. At the same time, one of the reasons that one lives a life with meditation is so that overall you're making some progress on yourself, and there's a certain long-term nondescript productivity out of it, in the same way that we'd like to think that by being prayer people, davening people, we're not just fulfilling a religious obligation of potentially appeasing a God, but that we are better humans for it. So it's hard to give a prescription, right? I am dubious of religious traditions, even sub-religious traditions within Judaism, who say, what's the prescription? Say 10 chapters of Tehillim a day and you'll be fine. I'm dubious of that, but I do think it's a good thing to say Tehillim, right? It reminds me of that scene in Frisco Kid that I use all the time when he's with the Native Americans and they're talking about rain and God, and the chief is saying to the Gene Wilder character Avram Belinsky, Rabbi Avram Belinsky, why doesn't your God make rain? And the Wilder character says, it's not that he can't make rain. It's just that's not what we pray to him for. We pray that God gives us strength when we are feeling weak. God shines a light when we're crawling around in darkness. But he doesn't make rain. And then he slaps his knee, and then rain starts pouring outside the teepee. And then he goes and then every once in a while he changes his mind, right? So we don't. I think you can correct me if you're wrong. When we say Mashiv Haruach or V'tein Talum Atar in the Amidah, I don't think that most of us are thinking that by our saying it, we are going to impact the precipitation out there. But we do think that by being people who pray for rain, we're somehow involved in a prayer life that's going to help the world, and maybe even in rain-based ways, right? So Rashi's not going to get there, and I certainly don't have a direct answer for it. I want to say one other thing to what you said, Larry. The bidirectional feedback loop, right? So I'm someone who, as you know, is speaking all the time for my job, and I'm speaking publicly all the time. And sometimes I speak from a prepared text, rarely, but sometimes when I want to get something exactly right, like at a eulogy. And sometimes I have notes in front of me, and sometimes I pretty much know what I'm going to say, but there are no notes in front of me because I want to speak somewhat extemporaneously. When I'm feeling a little bit low, I'm not talking a clinical depression, a little bit not myself, a bit nervous about something. If I'm having a little bit of self-doubt, not like self-loathing, but self-doubt about how I'm going to be received or how well the content I'm about to share, I start to mumble on my words, and it starts to feel like I have rocks in my mouth, and I cannot produce fluid language, which I know I am generally capable of doing. And as soon as I start to experience myself being less capable than normal of being able to produce fluid language, it boomerangs back at me, and I start to feel worse about myself and less confident and more emotionally down, which of course makes it that much harder for me to produce it, right? One can spiral as one pays too much attention to the relationship between one's emotional situation and one's physical situation. I think the other side is that one can sometimes spiral up, right? So if you're feeling very confident, sometimes that will actually produce better content, and the more you produce better content, you might actually feel more confident and up. So I think we're still novices in realizing the actual connection between body and mind. It's fascinating to me that Rashi got some of it, and Rashi assumed that the Torah knew it thousands of years before. Okay, thanks, Rick. Very kind. Then you have to watch more. Joanna, thanks for waiting on that.
I happen to have once given a Dvar Torah on Parshat Ki Tisa on the Vishamru verses, where I referenced Rashi there, which is how I know that Rashi, on the word Vayinafash. And it's quite fascinating because in light of this, which I didn't know, I wish I would have known to compare it to this then, because there he says, he's getting at what's the difference between Shabbat and Vayinafash. So he relates that Vayinafash is that ability to take a calming breath. And he specifically says after tiresome work, after hard work. So it's really interesting now, a really interesting contrast to think about like slavery and Shabbat as two completely opposite ends of the spectrum, which in many respects they are.
Thank you, Joanna. And with the wonders of the internet, I'm going to pull up the Rashi there, and you can walk us through it because I would like to be refreshed about that Rashi. So it's now on the screen. Walk us through it as you understand it.
So, ketargumo v'nach, because I know the Rashi, I would say like the expected translation here is rested, and the v is really a but. V'chol lashon nefesh hu lashon nefesh. The word, the shorish nun fe shin being used as a verb is really related to the language of nefesh, of one's soul. Shemeshiv nafsho, that one's nefesh is restored. Unishimato behargio, and his breath is a calm one. Mitorah hamalacha, after hard labor.
This would be I'm angry at myself for in the conversations we recently had at the board meeting about creating a policy of sabbatical for every full-time employee in Temple Beth Am. I didn't quote this Rashi because that's essentially what it's saying, right? Meshiv nasho, you restore your power, your spiritual power, and your very breath, bahargio, in the relaxation that happens, mitorah hamlacha, from the incessant burden of work. Yeah. Was there more there, or really that part?
I think that's the ikar of it. And so it's really, like my mind now wonders, when Rashi wrote this, was he thinking of when we were slaves and we were, kotzer ruach? And because, in both circumstances, you work hard, but in one circumstance, it's a normal kind of working hard that has an opportunity for restoration, and that makes all the difference in the world.
It's fascinating. There are many words for many things in Hebrew. One of the words for vacation in Hebrew is what? There's chofesh, which is freedom. There's also nofesh. To do a getaway is nofesh, right? So a vacation literally means is it's souling, it's spiriting, it's taking a break from avodah kasha. Avodah kasha doesn't have to be oppressive labor that Pharaoh puts on you. It's the hard work of working, right? So Shabbat v'yinafash, God was saying from the very beginning that if you're going to work 6 days, there's got to be some kind of nofesh. One day I'll experience a Shabbat that way. Okay, Marshall.
This whole word of ruach, I'm just remembering from beginning of Breshit, and I wasn't with you, Rabbi Kligfeld, when you started this in Monroe.
Where were you?
Well, I wasn't here, right? Ruach Elohim rachefet al pnei hamayim, and the ruach of God, something hovered maybe over the face of the water. So what does ruach mean? Everyone said, okay, fine. The Spirit of God. No, it was the wind of God. Or maybe it was both, right? And I look here and I see the phrase, rucho and shimato. And I think Alter sort of captures this. He makes reference to Rashi. Because the ruach, the Hebrew ruach can mean breath, wind, or spirit. This translation follows Rashi's understanding of the phrase, a construction that is attractive because of its concreteness. The slaves groaning under hard bondage, a condition made all the harder by Moses' bungled intervention, can hardly catch their breath and so are in no mood to listen to Moses. Others render this term as impatient or crushed spirit. And I even think of the phrase, the wind was knocked out of me, I didn't have any breath. And all these various translations of the word ruach all really points to the beauty of the Hebrew language. It's multi levels, and I think only enrich our understanding of the text.
Thanks, Marshall. With Rebecca not here, I'm going to use the phone as she did and kind of point it to whoever's speaking in the room. Speaking of multi-direction, like I'm streaming you and you're streaming you, and then someone's streaming me, streaming you. So you can see me showing you other people in the room when someone else is speaking. Okay, I'll just put that right here for now. Barry, yes.
So I'm listening to all of this, and two streams of thought coming to me. Is this working? Okay.
Yeah.
One is the stress, the physical stress. If a board and someone's pressing a board on my chest with all their might, there's no breath in me to do much. But in meditation, giving away myself, losing my sense of self. I'm not physically emoting in this stress. I'm not there. That's a test of meditation to actually release myself and be in the other space. But in a community, in this situation, that's an impossible achievement. On an individual, it's possible.
Very good, Mary. There was nothing that the Israelites could possibly have done to somehow meditate their way out of the tsaras that they were in. They needed a more powerful redeemer. Okay. Anything else on this verse? Because now we're going to get into that long, strange Rashi. So kind of buckle up. Joel, will you bring this closer to Marshall just so that people over there can just be seeing Marshall up close? Okay. So Marshall, jump in. I both want you to read this Rashi as is without a whole lot of like cliff notes, but I'm going to need to give you a couple of connective threads. So they have a great view of your fingers, Joel. And they're very good. You're very nice fingers. Some connective threads so that even from his first word, it makes sense. What people who have studied this Rashi have said, and I haven't read modern scholarly material on this, but I've read a lot of like the super commentaries on Rashi, is that he's basically going back. He's gotten to this part of Va'era. If you look ahead, we're on verse 9, right? By verse 14, look ahead. This whole narrative section is over. By verse 14, we're getting into a genealogy and names of people. So we're about to end the long pre-section of the pre-Exodus story, of the burning bush and the initial moments that God tells Moses to go back to the Israelites and tell them what's happening, right? And then we're going to take a break from that. So it's almost as if people believe that Rashi realizes that if he has anything more to say on this issue, he should say it now. That's usually not the way Rashi operates. Rashi is not writing an essay. Rashi is not writing a chapter in a book about, a chapter of Tanakh. He's writing a linear commentary, but all of a sudden here, it's as if he's saying, you know what? I don't think I conveyed all the things that I wanted to convey that had been sitting in my mind since the beginning of Parshat Va'era. Go back a second and look at just the verses of Parshat Va'era, chapter 6, verse 2. Remember that in our designation, Va'era begins on the second verse of a chapter because the Christian distinction is different. How does our parsha begin? By Elohim speaking to Moses, saying to him, Ani Adonai. Remember what Rashi said there about the ways in which the previous ancestors, they may have heard that Yud He Vav He was a thing, but they didn't get to experience God that way. Va'era al Avraham, and I revealed myself to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob using the name El Shaddai, but my name Adonai was not made clear to them. And I now fulfill the covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan that they had dwelled in. And how am I doing that? And now I'm paraphrasing. By verse 5, I'm listening to the cries of the Israelites as they have been oppressed in Egypt. Those first 4 verses, really the first 3 verses, we spent a lot of time talking about how God allowed God's self to be revealed and to whom, and what does it mean for God to be one who fulfills promises. Rashi said a lot of it about that then, but it seems now he's saying, you know what, reader, before we leave this scene, I have more to say on this topic. So I feel like that is almost obligatory context to understand what you're about to read. Okay, with that in mind, unless anyone has any questions or comments on that, Marshall, start reading Karov. It's right after.
I just have my different things here. 1 second, sorry.
No problem.
Karov inyan zeh, close to this thing. Shamati b'parasha zo.
A little louder, please.
I'm sorry. Try it again. Karov inyan zeh. Shamati b'parasha zo. Me Rabbi Baruch b'Rabbi Eliezer.
Pause. Just translate those words because we have to linger on what those words mean for a second.
Okay, I'll just do a literal translation. Close to this matter. I heard this in the section from Rabbi Baruch, the son of Rabbi Eliezer.
Okay, so it sounds like he's writing an essay, right, or a drash. I do not know. I'm sure it is knowable. I do not know who Rabbi Baruch Rabbi Eliezer is. If you've been in this class 10 years, maybe once, Rashi makes reference to some named person that you learn something from. It's very rare. And we don't even know what inyan zeh means. What matter? It seems not to be, as will become clear going forward, the immediate antecedent. The immediate antecedent is this question of kotzer ruach and shortness of breath. But it seems, and this is why I introduced it this way, that what he means by this matter, it's the stuff Rashi, was speaking about just a few verses before, but for us it's months ago because we're going slowly, at the beginning of Parshat Va'era. And the way I would somehow render the sentence is, related to this topic, I heard with respect to this matter from one of my teachers, Rabbi Baruch but Rabbi Eliezer, right? Bringing us a little bit back in the Parsha. Rick, question, comment?
Yeah, the Silverman Rashi has a footnote there on this section, and all it says is, it is evident that this refers only to the explanation of Ani Adonai.
Yeah, right. So it's evident, but that makes it odder that he's putting it here, right? Because if you're Rashi and you had extra thoughts to say on Ani Adonai, you could have put it then. So we don't really know why it's here, but it does seem clear / evident that Inyan Zeh, this matter, is not the matter he was just talking about, but the matter from earlier on in the part in the chapter. Barry?
Rashi didn't have an insert function in his computer, so he put it here.
Right. I mean, it does raise a question in general how the intellectual exercise of writing a commentary and editing it and publishing it even took place 1,000 years ago. But even so, right, if the rabbis were able to order the Talmud, not perfectly well, but pretty well 1,000 years before that, it's interesting Rashi couldn't have just put this earlier. Okay, go ahead. The Hevili.
He brought me this proof from this text. But the word Ri'ayah is sort of interesting that you have the Resh Aleph Hey there. Sort of
Closer, Marshall, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Okay. Behevili Ri'ayah Mimikra Zeh. So he brought me this proof, or this insight, something from Resh Aleph Hey,
Right.
from this text.
Right. And the comment you were going to say about that, it's interesting.
That I found that here Ri'ayah is like a proof, but also the Resh Aleph Hey shows up there to see. I
Yeah.
can see something
Yeah.
based on this text.
It is interesting why the Hebrew word ra'ayah, which means proof, I mean, it makes sense, right? But it's just a different way of connecting the ideas that we have in English. Our word for proof doesn't relate to the verb to see, although they're connected ideas. In Hebrew, they're etymologically siblings, right? So he brought me, whoever this Rabbi Baruch ben Rabbi Eliezer, brought me proof from this verse. And what's the verse? Is the verse that I have up on the screen. Okay, so I think you in the room can see it, right? And then you on Zoom can see it. 16th chapter of Jeremiah. Jeremiah, for those of you who don't remember, is essentially a prophet of doom, telling the Israelites in the wicked generation that destruction is coming, and they're not listening to him, right? Lachein hineni modiam. Therefore, I'll instruct them, I'll teach them. Bepam hazot, this time, odi aim et yadi, I will let them know my hand, but it's my might or my prowess. Vet gvurati, my power. Vi'adu kishmi Adonai. And boy, I'm accentuating, will they know that my name is God? Right? So here, what's the connection between this verse and our topic? Shmi Adonai, right? So this is what shows that what Rashi is referring to here is the stuff he had said before on whether or not the Israelites in the generation of the ancestors knew the name of God. Here, Jeremiah is saying they will certainly know that my name is God. What's the tone of Jeremiah's comment here? They will know that my name is God when I show what?
Fulfill my promises, or
and when I come down harshly on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah is saying, my hand on you, not on your oppressors, right? Jeremiah is saying, I'm going to, destroy Jerusalem, right? You are going to know my wrath because you are sinning against me, and the temple that you have sitting there in Jerusalem is being used for disgusting purposes. And boy, will you know that my name is Adonai, and I'm going to fulfill this promise. Very different tone of voice than Parshat Ve'era, which is they're going to know that my name is God and I fulfill my promise, not to destroy them, but to destroy their enemies, so that they'll finally get to the land of Canaan, right? So that's what Rashi is going to play with, okay? Limadnu
kasha kadosh baruch hu me'amen et devarav afilu lefuranut modia sheshemo Adonai. So this is to teach us that God, I guess amen is to fulfill.
Right, what a great word, amen, to amen something, right? We use the word amen as like at the end of a bracha.
May it be so.
May it be so. I remember the day in 7th grade Hebrew school class where my teacher said that amen means so be it. I didn't know what the words so be it meant, but I knew that that's what I was supposed to think in my head when she said amen. But amen is the PL to make someone believe or to make something believable, to reify, right? To make it so that someone could say about it, Amen. 1 second, Alan, keep going, Marshall.
Afilu leporanut modia sheshemo Adonai. That even in terms of punishment, he fulfills his words. That he fulfills his words that his name is Adonai.
I'm gonna change the commas a little bit, Marshall. This verse teaches us that when God is coming to make it clear that God fulfills God's promises, even when it comes to puranut, destruction, punishment, God says, Shmi Adonai, right? You're going to know that my name is God. Even when it's bad stuff, God is fulfilling. V'chol shekain.
V'chol shekain ha'amana l'tova. And how much more, and even so, his, I guess he fulfills his words when it's a matter of, I guess, goodness.
Right. So if God is going to say, boy, are you going to know that my name is Adonai when I'm proving to you that I'm going to fulfill my promises to be harsh with you, it makes even more sense that when God is ensuring that God's going to fulfill a positive promise, that God's going to say, you're going to know my name is Shem Adonai. So this is a verse that Rashi's teacher said to Rashi will strengthen your point on the verses from 4 or 5 verses ago, that this notion of Shmi Adonai means that God's going to fulfill God's promises. Let me add one more sentence, and then we'll go to Alan and then Rick. You know how we marvel? I certainly marvel, and sometimes we mention it, that Rashi really, really, really knows the Tanakh by heart. Like that he's reading a verse in Shemot, and he hears one word, and he knows that the way to make sense of that word is from the 7th chapter of the prophet Zephaniah, right? Like it's not a joke, it's not an exaggeration. We say that he knows the Tanakh by heart. But I'm finding interesting him sharing with us that he didn't always know it by heart. And one of his teachers says, Rashi, you might be forgetting, there's a verse in Jeremiah which you could have used in your commentary, right? He had forgotten, and he's okay to forget. He had forgotten that there's a verse in Jeremiah which makes the arguments that Rashi was making 3 or 4 verses ago stronger. I'm just fascinated by that, right? That in order to know something by heart, you have to once have not known it by heart and had been taught to you, either self-taught, autodidactically, or from a mentor. Alan, Rick, and then is Barry's hand up? Okay, and then slightly from Barry. Alan.
I was just very surprised about seeing Adonai, which is normally associated with God's mercy, according to the rabbis, as being something that does punishment. And I love the Rashi here that focuses on it's Adonai in punishment, but it's I'll call the Chomer even more so when it's going to be Adonai in giving goodness.
Yeah. Listen, the rabbinic overlay of Adonai, Yud He Vav He being Rachamim, and Elohim being judgment works all the time until it doesn't, right? It's a wonderful frame. I'm given many sermons about it, many charges to bar mitzvah boys and girls about it, except that sometimes Yud He Vav He is used when God is speaking about being harsh, and sometimes Elohim is being used when God is speaking from compassion. So it's a wonderful frame. It's just not a perfect frame. Yeah. Rick, thanks for that, Alan.
You're welcome.
Yes, along the theme of names, so here Rashi is specifically using Hakadosh Baruch Hu, which, unless I'm wrong, he hasn't used that description. I was looking back pages. He doesn't usually use that whole long, what is it, 1, 2, 3 with a chupchik 4 letters. Forget the kush in front of it, but he deliberately chose that form of God's name there. He could have just used Hey Yud like he usually does, I think.
So what do you make of that?
Maybe he's saying like each generation calls God what they want to. So Rashi is choosing this one in the Middle Ages. I don't know. I thought it was amusing that I haven't. Is it right that we haven't seen that in a while?
I'm sure you're right that we haven't seen it in a
Hakadosh
while.
Baruch Hu. I don't
A
know.
while for us means something different because, like, it could be 17 verses ago, and that could have been months ago. But I don't think it's sui generis. I don't think Rashi never uses Hakadosh Baruch Hu.
Okay.
But it is interesting that Rashi uses that term here. Good. Anything else so far? Okay, so that's Rashi. Oh, sorry, Barry. We have Barry's half comment. We'll give you a full comment, Barry.
Well, and there's two comments now. So the Shemot, we think of Shemot as being the names of the people who came down in Egypt, but Shemot is God's revealing God's name in different ways. I'm just being hit with that now. The other is Rashi expresses his own humility, that although, he knew the entire thing by heart, but he can admit that he may have forgotten something and someone reminded him.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Barry. Okay, so that's part one of this oddly placed, long, and different than a normal Rashi. Now part two. Okay.
Rabotenu Durashuhu Le'inyan Shalmala. And our rabbis, I guess, interpreted it in this matter, regarding the matter of above, I guess, previous in the text.
Okay, now those 4 words or 5 words need a lot of context to make sense. Rabotenu Drashuhu, our sages gave a midrash on it. What's now the immediate antecedent to what he's talking about? What's the it? So, but it's not the last verse. So in this new weird Rashi has established a new antecedent, a new previous topic, and it's not the last verse we've been discussing. It's the first 3 verses of Va'era. Okay, so when he says Rabotenu Drashuhu, our rabbis drashed it. The it he's referring to is verses 2, 3, 4 of our chapter, in which God had said that I am God and that I didn't make my name known to the previous ancestors. And when the rabbis drashed it, Inyan Shalmala, they connected those verses to a previous issue far above, or more above that. The Inyan Shalmala, like an issue that was above it, before it, is not the 3 verses, but something that came before that. And what was that? Shamar.
She'amar Moshe Lama Harayota.
Okay, so now we got to go back to the end of Parshat Shemot. Look at chapter 5. I don't need to pull up on screen because you all have the book of Shemot. Chapter 5, verse 22. Okay, so very, I guess this is the anti-penultimate verse of the book of Parshat Shemot. When Moses sees that the initial attempt to get Pharaoh to relent made it harder for the Israelites, and the Israelites complained to Moses, making Moses' job harder, we read in verse 22, Vayashov Moshe, where this page, everyone have it, right? Chapter 5, 22. Vayashov Moshe, Moses returned, El Adonai, to God, Vayomar, and said, Adonai, God, Lama harayot al-am hazeh. Why have you made life so difficult for this people? Lama zeh shalachtani. Why did you send me? If you remember from back then, what's Moshe's affect in that verse? How is he acting towards God?
It's challenging.
Challenging
God.
Challenging might be the most generous way of describing him. You could describe him as whiny, complaining, right? God's, and I'm kind of setting up what Rashi is about to do this midrash. God had said Moses on this professional task. Moses didn't want to accept it, but he did. In his first attempt to kind of intercede between Pharaoh and the Israelites, things got worse. The Israelites complained to Moses. Moses complained back to God. Why are you making this so hard? What Rashi's saying now in our verse is, there is a connection between in the opening lines of Parshat Va'era and my name of God I did not make known to the previous ancestors, but now I make my promise known. There's a connection between that and the fact that Moses complained early on in his job. Just hold that association, because if you don't, then the next few lines won't make sense. Barry?
No, it's okay. Go on.
Okay.
For this.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said to him, Chaval al di abdan v'la mishtachin.
This is a common phrase. It's like in Jew speak, yeshiva speak, and yeshiva speak, and from speak. There are certain phrases from rabbinic literature that become part of the way that people speak to each other. If you spend enough time amongst yeshiva Jews, you'll hear people reference this phrase in normal parlance. See if you can translate it.
Well, it's at least a translation I have, since my Aramaic is not that strong. Alas for those that are gone.
Right. So chaval, woe, al da'avdin, on those that are avad, that are no longer here.
Lost, maybe.
Velo mishtachin, and are no longer found. This phrase is basically nostalgia for those who are no longer with us, but it's almost always used as a critique of the ones who are, right? It's rhapsodic about, right, the great generation. You know, if you're rhapsodizing about the great American generation of the 50s or 60s or whatever, I'm not saying one should do that. It's a subtle or not so subtle critique that such great people are not in our country anymore, right? And if you are waxing rhapsodic about the tremendous efflorescence of culture and learning in Warsaw in the 1930s, you're not just bemoaning the Nazis' destruction, you're saying, they don't make Jewish communities like that anymore. That's a situation I might, if you're remembering, the Yiddish theater in Warsaw in the 1930s. We don't find people like that anymore. They don't make them like that anymore. Okay, so I'm gonna have to keep doing this so you remember what's going on here, because this is a Talmudic argument. Okay, Rashi is saying that the rabbis said on the connection between the opening lines of our parsha, where God is saying, I'm going to make myself revealed, and the connection between that and the fact that Moshe complained, and that Moshe was like kind of hectoring God. What's your name? What's your name? They're asking what your name. I need to know what your name is. That on that, basically God said, Moshe, you're making me miss Abraham. You're making me miss Isaac, and you're making me miss Jacob. Woe on those who were so great, and where can they be found?
They didn't complain.
They didn't complain. Okay, so that's what it's setting up. Go ahead.
Yesh li lihit onen mitata avot. At least my translation, which I think is good, I really have reason to deplore the death of the patriarchs. I know the word lihit onen means to complain, at least in modern Hebrew. So,
yeah, lehit onain and lehit lonain in modern Hebrew are mostly interchangeable.
To complain,
but lehit onain is more like to groan, and it could be a groaning from pain, not just a groaning from complaining. This is God saying that to Moses. Lehit onain with an ayin?
No, with an olive.
I don't think so, but I could be wrong. I don't know that an ayin there works.
It was an ayin about asking any answer.
Lehit onain. I have to look that up. So this is within a midrash. This is not Rashi saying this. Rashi saying the rabbi said, God looks to Moshe and says, "Oy, it was so sad that those ancestors, those patriarchs had to die." Right? Try to not take that personally, right? Like, lahavdil, it's, November of 2009, and someone comes to my office and says, "Oh, that Rabbi Rembam, he was wonderful." Right? Right? Like, I'm not saying that happened. I'm saying, like, that's what this is like, right? Oh, those pressman years. Okay. Harbe pamim.
הרבה פעמים נגליתי עליהם באל שדי, ולא אמרו לי מה שמך. Many times I revealed to them, I guess, my name as El Shaddai, and they did not say to me, what is your name?
So again, this is Rashi paraphrasing a midrash, not quoting directly. In that midrash, God is saying to Moshe, you know, I let them know me as El Shaddai. When I did, they didn't say, do you have another name? Is there a more intimate name? Can I get closer to you? Are there other names that you're sharing with other people, not with me, God? No, they just accepted it, right? Ata.
Yata amarta ma shemo. And you said, what is his name? Ma omar alehem. What shall I say unto them?
Right, so that is a paraphrase of when, or a truncation of when we read that Moses said to God, when they ask me, God, what's his name, what should I tell them? As if Moshe was passing off, like, I don't care, but they might ask me, what's your name? I need to know. In the Midrash, it's presenting Moshe as being like annoying and feverishly saying, I need to know, give me more, because I need to know more information. Barry?
Okay, I just got to put a word in for Moshe here. So Abraham and Yitzhak, their lives were totally different. Sorry. No, just working. Okay.
No, you're working, but Joel's fingers. So there's a lot going on. For those of you on Zoom, there's a lot going on to make this happen.
They were not tasked with leading a million people to do something. They were just tasked to do a specific thing for themselves in their life, and they were born free. What's Moshe? Moshe was accidentally born into a situation where he was raised in Pharaoh's house, and then he leaves and he's in the desert, and God comes upon him. I mean, it's a totally situation, and God's tasking him to lead a million people, and he can't speak. His mouth doesn't work. So, who are you? What's this all about? Yeah, it's totally it's unfair, God, to demand of Moshe the same thing he demanded of Abraham and Yitzhak.
Right. So there's so many layers to this, because what Barry's responding to is the thrust of the Midrash that Rashi is quoting, but we don't even yet know if Rashi likes the Midrash he's quoting. He's just raising it that the rabbis made this association to suggest that when God's response at the beginning of this parsha, saying, I promise to make my name known to them and I'll establish my covenant with them, it was a response, according to the Midrash, to Moshe's incessant, whiny complaining. Okay? Now, that gets to V'gam Hakimoti. Now, Rashi now is out of the Midrash and back to Rashi, right? And what's the V'gam Hakimoti? And I know there's a lot to hold on together, and if you hold on to 60% of it, I give you a lot of credit. Go back 3 verses or 4 verses to verse 4 of our chapter. This is the last of the 3 verses that opens Parshat Va'era that Rashi seems to be trying to say more about, right? So chapter 6, verse 4, V'gam Hakimoti et briti itam, and so God says, I will establish I will keep my covenant with them, latet lehem, to give to them at Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan, at Eretz Megurehem, the land of their sojournings, asher garuba, that they lived there. Okay, so Rashi's now bringing us back to this verse, okay? And
before we go back to that verse, can we comment on the previous one, or you'd rather not?
No, go ahead, comment away. We're clearly not going to finish this Rashi anyway, so go ahead.
Right. I was going to say, I don't feel bad because we're not going to finish today, and Diane has something else to say.
Good.
When I was young, I used to ask my father, how come? And he always would criticize me and say, stop using that phrase, how come? You, when you were just laning the verse from chapter 5, verse 22, you reminded me of a discussion we had when you said, Lama. You didn't say Lama. I went back and I checked all the previous trope on the word Lama, and they're all Lama. It's the only time up till now in Shemot that we actually have Lama. And to my ears, when I heard Lama, I'm not thinking why, I'm thinking, for what? For what purpose?
That's right.
And I think it kind of fits in here where Moses is asking God, for what purpose are you doing this? Which is slightly different in terms of connotation than simply saying, why? Why are you doing this?
Are you going to post that in the TBA Llama WhatsApp group?
So I want to go back to the words Inyan Shel Mala. So when we got there, it is true that Mala means previous, but Mala is often a reference to heaven. And so this whole discussion is about kind of what's going on in heaven. Like God's reaction to all this. It's almost like they're saying he's having some discussion up there, maybe with the angels about, this upstart Moshe. What's the matter with him?
It's a lovely possibility. I don't think it's pshat. I think that mala here probably just means above.
Right.
But we can add it to the layers of what's going on here, because it does seem like Rashi and the guy whom he quoted and the guy quoting and is about to disagree with is expanding the conversation that happened between heaven and earth, between Moshe and God when Moshe is being given this job. Yeah. Okay. Let's take all 2 minutes we have left. So keep going, Marshall. Ukshebikesh.
Ukshebikesh Abraham likbor et Sarah lo matzah kever ad shekana v'damim merubim.
Okay, let's translate
and
that.
When Abraham sought to bury Sarah, he did not find a burial place for her until he acquired it with a lot of money.
So some versions of Rashi, instead of using the word kever, have the word karka, land, same thing. Like, if you can follow the argument, where are we in the argument? What is this reminder that Abraham didn't have land to bury Sarah until he bought it? What is it doing inside the argument that Rashi is bringing from the Midrash? Can someone put it together? Because I know it's hard to remember.
Is it trying to show how Abraham's better?
How? Yeah, and so how does this show that he didn't complain?
We haven't gotten there yet.
No, we have. This is the
Responsibility to
everyone who's here needs a microphone. Yeah.
Abraham took responsibility to purchase land
Right.
for the grave for Sarah. He did not say, just like, God magically give me a place to bury my
Right.
wife.
And chronologically, and then we'll get to Elon, the death and burial of Sarah happens after Brit Ben Abtarim, the covenant that Abraham makes with God, in which Abraham is promised all that he's going to need. So the Rashi is saying, that the Midrash is saying, that God is saying to Moses, I promised Abraham that his needs would be taken care of, but not all of them immediately. And when Sarah died, Abraham did not turn to me and say, God, where am I going to bury her? He sold some sheep and he took the coins and he paid full price for a burial plot. That's the way a responsible person does it, darn it. Elon, microphone and camera.
Yeah, I'm going to put some modern sensibility to this, which is very different than that interpretation, which is actually, when I read it, I say, boy, Abraham's a schmuck. I can tell the guy to do anything. He'll do it. And actually, Moses is actually an interesting character because he will push back. To me, it is a much more compelling, Woody Allen has a bit about the binding of Isaac and saying that, some people will listen to a loud, resonating voice no matter what it tells it. And I actually think that this is a feather in Moses's cap as opposed to a negative.
Good. So similar to Barry, we've got some arguments on the table kind of pushing against the thrust of the Midrash, and we still don't even know what Rashi thinks about the Midrash, right? Because we're still within Rashi quoting the Midrash, right? We're going to have to end it there.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.